Hi, this is Kogito, and welcome to another Through the Ages video. In the last video, we saw that as a result of my winning the final 3-player game in this group, the order of the group has now been decided. I will finish first and move on to the upper bracket in the next round. Chupacabra and DB Starman will finish second and third respectively and go to the lower bracket. And Socketch, unfortunately, is guaranteed to finish last and be eliminated from the tournament. So this will be true regardless of the result of my last 2-player game with DB Starman, but there are still some reasons to care about it. First of all, it's for Glico. Second of all, well, obviously for Pride, you always want to win if possible, and for most of this game, it wasn't, settled. The group hadn't been settled yet. And there's also a seeding reason where the more points you get, in the previous round, those points will determine at least partially where you're seated in the next round. So there's always reason to want to win. And so without further ado, let's take a look at the final game in this round. In this game, I'm playing second. We can take a look at the leaders and wonders. There's no Bach or Shakespeare in this game, so the 2 power leaders in 2-player games aren't here. There is Darwin as our single real culture leader, who is pretty good, but not as good as them, but still notable. There's some other potential good leaders here too. Isaac Newton, it can always be good. Maria with Ocean Liner Service. James Cook, the No Suez. Catherine the Great and Nobel can also be good. So a lot of options in H2. There's also 2 power windows in Ocean Liner Service and Harvard College. As for H3, though, we do have 2 theater leaders, Fleming and Marlena, as well as the Hollywood, so that's definitely a very notable synergy. There is also Sid Meier and Pierre with the internet. There's a Manhattan Project, but, you know, Sid Meier, not great synergy with that, so not a lot of synergy with Manhattan Project unless you're going for a potential war, which could actually work in this 2-player game because, again, no Bach and Shakespeare and no Gandhi either. As for Age 1, notable, there are 4 very strong wonders in Age 1. And most of the leaders in Age 1 kind of want to be elected early, so an Age A leader who you might want to transition into an Age 1 leader quickly is more powerful in this game, although that maybe won't be as relevant here for me, as we'll see in a second, because DB Starman takes the pyramids, which I think makes sense, but it should be noted that on my turn, if I don't take any of these cards, then that means the Acropolis will be available for 1 civil action on my turn, so I was also not that sad to see the pyramids be taken by DB Starman. And also for that reason, I didn't want to take the Acropolis for myself, especially since there's a very powerful leader Confucius available for me. Hammurabi I expected to be taken by DB Starman, so I was very comfortable just committing to a leader Confucius this early, especially since he comes with an urban growth. Age 1 begins. DB Starman, interesting, he didn't take Hammurabi, takes Homer instead. Now, it is true Homer is available for 1 less civil action, and he pairs very well with the pyramids, so I understand this decision. I would have taken Hammurabi because I really like him, but if you value Homer more, Hammurabi less, I get it. Other things are normal. I do definitely take the Acropolis after electing Confucius. I think maybe in this game, where there's no Bach or Shakespeare to really supercharge your culture, perhaps Acropolis is even more important as a way to really get a lot of urban buildings going and build more culture than your opponent can get. Otherwise, I do normal things, except notably that I built the mine before the lab, even though I have the urban growth, because with Confucius, I figured that I would have enough science that the rock is more important to me than the extra science would be. Especially since Acropolis is also going to save me science. I draw a wealthy territory and a legion tactic. DB Starman builds 1 stage of the pyramids instead of the lab and takes the alchemy. Perhaps the plan is to build an alchemy directly, though that will be a little harder without an urban growth. Also takes an AJ frugality. You don't never really want to take AJ yellow cards beyond turn 1 unless it's an engineering genius. The frugality at least will be pretty okay for DB Starman, and it's true, there's not an obvious alternative. Maybe increasing population instead of taking the alchemy, though if DB Starman's increasing the population this turn, they probably would rather build the lab instead of the pyramids. On the other hand, starting with the pyramids makes more sense because there's Machu Picchu on the row, so perhaps DB Starman is planning to complete pyramids next turn and then take Machu Picchu. And increasing their population this turn would put them in consumption too, so the frugality in this sense is kind of giving them 2 food for 1 civil action, which is a more justifiable rate. I see the territory over the tactic. I don't want to seed tactics if I can avoid it. So I think that's pretty not obvious. Reveals developments of science. Now, for my end, I like seeing the printing press here this early, even though there's no Shakespeare in the game. There, first of all, is Darwin for printing press synergy. Second of all, just in general, I think maybe especially when there aren't those power leaders, getting culture going earlier with an early printing press, I think is even more important. Also, there is Leonardo in the game, so the printing press is even better than it normally is in a 2-player game. So I was very comfortable just spending my turn building a printing press, especially with Confucius. I should have enough science to support the 3 science I'm spending on the printing press technology. There also wasn't that much else obvious that I would rather take on the row, so I think this is definitely the right play. I draw another Legion tactic and a bonus card. DB Stormman finishes pyramids and does indeed take Machu Picchu, so that made sense that they prioritized pyramids over the lab. And also takes a rich land. With delaying the lab, they're gonna be a bit low on science, so I think I agree with taking the yellow card over a technology here. Machu Picchu, of course, is better in 2-player games than other formats, because in a 2-player game you're guaranteed, well, you're almost guaranteed to get an irrigation and an iron if you want one, although in this case, DB Stormman actually isn't, because the first copy of irrigation might be discarded on my turn. So if I don't take this copy, I could potentially cut the second copy of irrigation, thus making the Machu Picchu weaker. So that should be noted as a risk DB Stormman is taking with this play. I siege one of the legions, because I don't need both. Reveals development of agriculture. Now, this turn, I'm basically the only, well, yeah, the only really great way for me to get, the only way, really, for me to get out of corruption is to increase my population twice, because my first worker is going to be unhappy. So that's going to take up 2 civil actions. So the question is what to spend my other 2 civil actions on, and there's basically 4 great cards in the row that I can only take 2 of. Now, I think, which is these 4. Now, the Knights is probably the one that we can discount because the tactic of my hit is an infantry tactic, so I don't know if I'll draw a Knights tactic. For that reason, I think it's safe or fine not to take this copy of Knights and to wait for Swordsman instead. So the question is just between the other 3. Now, this Engineering Genius, I think, is the most important card for me to take because it's on this slot. So if I don't take the Engineering Genius, then DB Starman is going to take it. And the Engineering Genius would be really good for DB Starman because they have the Machu Picchu that they could complete it potentially a turn earlier. So I definitely wanted to deny it to DB Starman and take it for myself. I think it's also a good card for myself. I might use it on the Acropolis, but even if I don't, which I might not be able to for corruption reasons, as was stated previously, there are a bunch of strong Age 1 and Age 2 wonders, so I felt very confident that I would be able to use this Engineering Genius for myself usefully. So the question then becomes which of these 2 cards, the Bread and Circuses or the Irrigation, to take. I think there's a case to be made for both of them. I think that the case to be made for the Bread and Circuses is, first of all, it gets me a Happy Face solution in my hand, and not just any Happy Face solution. If I'm kind of aiming for Darwin, especially with my printing press, and obviously the arena is very powerful, is what you want with Darwin. So I think this card definitely needs to be highly considered. The other reason to take it, as I stated previously, if I don't take the Irrigation, then I can potentially cut the second copy of Irrigation, thus denying DB Starman value from the Machu Picchu. So that also really needs to be strongly considered. However, there are also some important reasons not to take the Bread and Circuses. First of all, of the 3 Age 1 wonders left in the deck, 2 of them are Happy Face wonders, and I'll probably want one of them, especially since I took the Engineering Genius. And so since I already have these Happy Face solution potentially with the wonders, this Bread and Circuses becomes less important. Now, if I take the St. Peter's Basilica, maybe I'll want the Bread and Circuses because it'll just give me 1 Happy Face. On the other hand, if I take St. Peter's Basilica, I probably will want to get Happy Faces from a drama or an opera instead. And so I probably wouldn't want the Bread and Circuses anyway. And if I get the Forbidden City, that should last me at least until mid-Age 2 or so, in which case I can hope to get an Organized Religion or a Team Sports for Happy Faces. And also, passing up the Irrigation is a big risk because it's very possible that DB Starman would get the second copy. DB Starman does have 1 more civil action than I do, after all. So if I pass up this Irrigation and DB Starman takes the second, then I might be in pretty big trouble, especially since the Irrigation has good synergy with the Ocean Liner service. Potentially Barbarossa. I'm kind of aiming for Da Vinci. Maybe DB Starman could take Da Vinci, though, with the Alchemy. And if they do that, then Barbarossa I might want to leave myself open for. and the irrigation would be very important with Barbarossa. So I think it's pretty close between these two cards, and there's a very strong reason to take either of them. At the end of the day, I did take the irrigation. I think the irrigation is probably the safer pick, just because if DB Starman does get that second copy and then cuts the selective breeding, I might be in big trouble. So just guaranteeing myself having a copy of irrigation is safer. It's less high upside though, because it means I can't cut the second copy from DB Starman, and especially with Machu Picchu, DB Starman really wants a copy of irrigation. So for that reason, I'm a little uncertain about this. However, as stated previously, I think the existence of these two Happy Face Wonders makes the Bread and Circuses less valuable. So I can also see the logic of this play. You could also argue, since I have this printing press and DB Starman doesn't, I'm going to be building a culture lead earlier than them, and so maybe I should take the safe route, especially with printing presses. They like irrigation because they could see more population earlier. I think it's quite close. I draw a Raiders into Reign of Terror. DB Starman plays the Frugality to increase the population once, twice, and 3 times to get out of corruption, as well as takes a reserves and builds a second lab. It's a little awkward to increase your population so many times before the event deck is even flipped, so you're not even worried about rats. So you're just kind of leaving a bunch of population behind. Now it is taking these civil actions early, so DB Starman probably, I mean, DB Starman could have saved 2 civil actions, potentially, by not popping the second time and putting a population into warriors to get out of corruption. Maybe DB Starman wants to leave this population potentially available for knights, though. But they didn't go after the second copy of knights. There are some pretty good cards, I think, in this 2 civil action row, especially the Code of Laws and also maybe the Breakthrough. Code of Laws perhaps less important for DB Starman with the pyramids, but it will be very good for me, and DB Starman is leaving it for me for 1 civil action. So I think maybe the Code of Laws should have been considered over popping twice. As for me, I see the Raiders. It felt like the less risky event. I definitely wanted to keep the tactic and the bonus card, and so I figured that losing the Raiders would be less of a big deal than losing the Reign of Terror. So as the less risky event, I seeded that. And I revealed the development of politics. I drew another bonus card, a phalanx tactic, and a scientific breakthrough. So I think this is the time for me to take a leader, and it kind of comes down between Leonardo and Barbarossa. I think both of them could definitely be defended. I think both Leonardo and Barbarossa could potentially be quite strong for me. I chose Leonardo instead, partly I think because it's a 2-player game. If it was, partly because, mostly because of printing presses. So because I'm, the weakness of printing press versus the alchemy, obviously, is you get a lot less science. So I felt that Leonardo giving me additional science would be very helpful. And the extra rocks I would get from Leonardo could also be very helpful because I'm only in bronze mines, and as we'll see, I'm not going to take this copy of iron, so it might be a little while before I upgrade my mines. And especially since I'm planning on, since I pass up the Bread and Circuses, I'm definitely going to want one of these 2 H1 wonders. The extra rocks I'll get from Leonardo will also make it easier for me to get that wonder, and then potentially a power H2 wonder while waiting a while to upgrade my mines. So yeah, I think Leonardo is better than Barbarossa, although Barbarossa with irrigation always needs to be strongly considered. I played Leonardo this turn. He's with the printing press, he's basically strictly better than Confucius. I mean, Confucius lets me seed every turn if I want to, but I thought that I probably wouldn't want to seed every turn anyway, with only 2 military actions. I also do definitely want that Code of Laws that DB Starman didn't take. I have the science for it, and it'll just be really helpful for me to get that 5th civil actions. That leaves me 2 civil actions left. I still need to get out of corruption, though, and I can do that by finishing my Acropolis. There, I think, wasn't a great... Maybe that was the only way, at least the only decent way of getting out of corruption, without using the engineering genius, because I don't have enough food to pop, and I could build a second printing press, but first of all, that would be pretty risky because I need to put these populations into my military soon, probably. And second of all, I think that also wouldn't get me out of corruption. So I think overall this turn, I don't think there are many other options for this turn. The weakness of this turn is that the major weakness is it does let DB Starman get the iron for 1 civil action. In order to avoid that, though, I would have had to not take the Could Have laws. So it's basically a choice between letting DB Starman have the Iron for one less civil action, or letting them have a Could Have laws for one civil action. So, and the Could Have laws is also really good for me. So I do think this turn was right. As for discards, while the Scientific Breakthrough would be a good card for me, well, maybe not, though, because DB Starman has Alchemies. So especially for that reason, I want to keep the bonus card since I ceded that wealthy territory. So I play the Legion this turn so that I don't have to discard it. And I draw a third bonus card. Unfortunately, I won't be able to keep it. DB Starman doesn't cede, instead does take that Iron for one civil action and is able to upgrade one with the rich land. At least they're missing one rock to upgrade 2 times this turn. As for the rest of their turn, they take the Irrigation, unsurprisingly, as well as an Urban Growth. So the extra civil action they save from the Iron being on 1, they end up spending on Urban Growth, which is pretty good, but not the end of the world. So this turn, however, I think from DB Starman's perspective makes sense. I can't cede. This turn I have a few options, but I ended up deciding to upgrade my farms this turn to, upgrading my farms and increasing my population together with corruption. I could have, instead of upgrading my farms, built a second library, which definitely can be considered, but I think getting the farms earlier is more important for me, especially when you're on irrigation. I don't know if I'll be able to get the ocean liner service. So getting food earlier is, you want to get food as early as possible when you're on irrigation so that they give you extra food so you can last a bit longer off of them into the late game. And I felt that was more valuable than the printing press. Also, if I put the printing press instead of upgrading farms, the next turn I would only have basically one open population to put into my military, because the second one would be unhappy, and that would not be enough to complete my Legion tactic. So if DB Starman pushes strength this turn, I would not be able to respond. So because of that, I think the farms is the right path to take here. I definitely want the swordsman with my Legion tactic. So yeah, I think this is a pretty natural turn. I don't think any of these other cards on the row. St. Peter's Basilica, I'd rather the Forbidden City anyway in my position, probably, and it's in the slot, it costs 3 civil actions for me, so I preferred upgrading these farms. I'll be able to get the Forbidden City next turn, and I'll be able to get the Iron next turn. I do have a build a second warrior, I think mainly to spend this military action. It's a little military action inefficient, because I would rather build the swordsman directly, but it does spend a military action in age 1 instead of age 2. And I might need the warrior at some point soon anyway, so I think that's probably fine. Although I can see an argument for waiting to build a swordsman directly instead. Draw a vast territory. DB Starman takes the Yanziska as a... Is he the last? Yeah, so the last age 1 leader just is available on the last turn. Now, it still costs 1 more civil action to do this than to win to the next turn and take him for 1 and then play him without getting the civil action back. But of course, DB Starman also really needs to replace Homer. So DB Starman was playing it a little risky to not take an age 1 leader until the very last turn. If Yanziska had been in the last 3 cards of the deck instead, they would have lost Homer and lost Homer's happy face forever. So that was a risk, but it ended up paying off. DB Starman gets a Yanziska, upgrades a mine, there's a second warrior, and copies my lynching tactic, so they are now 1 strength ahead of me. Thanks to Yanziska. Age 2 begins. I really want that Forbidden City. Kinda, the reason I passed up the Forbidden Circuses was because I was aiming for this, so I kinda need it. And it'll be good for me, especially with the Engineering Genius. So the question is, first of all, how to get out of corruption, and then what else I want to do with my turn. It's a little tricky to get out of corruption, because I can't increase my population, and both my workers are unhappy. But I guess it's not that tricky, because I can just upgrade mine. I could try to wait for coal, but I think that would be too risky. DB Starman might cut coal, it might be until late. So even though this is a pretty late iron, I still think it's worth doing here. It also gets me out of corruption, obviously. The other way to get out of corruption would have been to play a swordsman and upgrade, I think, both of my warriors to swordsmen, which could also definitely be defended, but since the event deck hasn't flipped yet, I thought that upgrading my production was more important than pushing strength. Let's go to the vast territory. Since DB Starman has Ian Ziska, they'll probably be more likely to get bonus cuts than I do, and I've already seeded one territory into the deck. I draw the other vast territory, which is funny, and a raid. Oh, and to look at our respective situations within Age 2, so I am getting a good culture advantage going against DB Starman thanks to my printing press. I also have one more science than they do thanks to Leonardo, although once they get alchemies going, or maybe potentially the scientific method, that will change. DB Starman will, however, have more rock and food production thanks to Machu Picchu, and our civil action, we have the same amount of civil actions. I'll have one more, though, after the Forbidden City, and DB Starman has one more military action thanks to Yanziska. So overall, it's looking pretty close. Maybe I have a slight advantage thanks to my culture advantage, which matters more in a two-player game, but it's not that big of one, so I don't think either of us is in an obviously, like, really advantageous position right now. DB Starman reveals development of markets. Oh yeah, another reason I didn't seed last turn was because if a resource event had been revealed, then I would have been in corruption with no good way to get out of it, because I spent, yeah, I spent all of my civil actions on important things. So that's another reason I didn't seed, which ended up being the right decision. Anyway, DB Starman increases the population. They took rocks from development of markets. And they take a knights for 2 civil actions, making sure that I don't get it. Looks like they have a plan for those knights. They build 2 of them. And they do indeed have a plan with the medieval army tactic, which pushes them up to 10 strength. Now, Yanziska is not benefiting their strength right now because they have a second warrior, which would have liked to been a third knight in this situation. But that's how it goes sometimes. Once they complete Machu Picchu and get irrigations going, they can potentially get a third knight. And they take a breakthrough. They're low in science, so the breakthrough would definitely be helpful. My turn, I still don't seed, I'm weakest, and again, I don't really want the territory in the deck. With the Engineering Genius, I have enough rocks to finish the Forbidden City, as well as build a swordsman directly, which will protect me from aggressions at least. So I think this is pretty natural to do. I mean, another option could have been, instead of completing the Forbidden City, I could have increased my population to build a swordsman directly, and then I would have had, let's see, I spent 5 rocks in the Forbidden City, so I would have had 6 left, so I could have then done 1, 2, I could have upgraded both mines then before playing the Forbidden City. And then I would have had 1 civil action left, which is equivalent to this. So basically, if I had done that play instead of the Forbidden City play, then I would have had my mines upgraded earlier at the cost of an extra civil action, which I think in retrospect probably would have been better. However, there is another consideration, which is the ocean liner services on the row. DB Starman will not be able to take the ocean liner service because they have the Machu Picchu. So by completing the Forbidden City on my turn, I will be able to take the ocean liner for myself. That is probably enough of a reason to value the Forbidden City over the mine upgrades. The cost is, without the mine upgrades, it'll be a little harder for me to complete the ocean liner service early, but hopefully Leonardo will help with that. I choose to increase my population, though, instead of taking any of these cards. I mean, these yellow cards could be fine, especially, well, the Frugality, since I'm aiming for ocean liner service, Frugality is not so exciting. Cultural Heritage could be good with my 6 civil actions. Urban Growth could be good just to get me urban buildings, and because if I want the ocean liner service quickly, I will need a lot of rocks. So I could have potentially gone with the urban growth, I think, in particular, instead of popping with 6 civil actions. But on the other hand, on my next turn, 3 of my civil actions will be devoted to taking the ocean liner service, so it'll be a bit civil action limited during next turn anyway, so spending that civil action in advance here is probably better than taking an Age 1 yellow card at this point in the game. I keep my bonus cards again, and I reveal another territory. I draw another territory. DB Starman doesn't seed, plays the irrigation, so to get some food going with the Machu Picchu. Also takes scientific method, even though they have alchemy in their hand, but they haven't played it yet, so I think that's fair enough. It'll be a couple turns before they're able to play the scientific method, but they have other things they can upgrade in the meantime. They also take a reserves. The religion, I'm a little questionable about. This may be a suggestion they've seeded rebellion, or perhaps they're worried that I seeded the rebellion since I went with the Forbidden City. On the other hand, you almost never want to build a temple directly like this, just because it's so civil action inefficient. And builds a stage of the Machu Picchu. I think maybe instead of building this temple, building the second stage of the Machu Picchu in advance to get that civil action out of the way, it would make sense. I get the reserves, though, as the only H2 card in the row, but another card they could have considered is the journalism. I think the journalism is a very important card, especially for DB Starman, because DB Starman would definitely like to have some way to push culture in H2, and I think the journalism, when there's no Bach in the game, the journalism is the best card to push culture in H2. Doing it this way leaves the journalism for me. Now, of course, the way I played my last turn, I don't think this was deliberate in my case, but it should have been, was to leave the journalism on 2 civil actions for DB Starman to make it more difficult to take. But I think DB Starman, this journalism would have been really good for them, and it's also going to be pretty good for me, as we'll see, because I'll actually take it on my turn. I'll talk about that in a bit. Anyway, I do want the Ocean Line of Service. It's early enough in H2 that I felt that it could definitely be very useful for me, especially since I'm only on irrigations. So this will give me population. We all know why Ocean Line of Service is good. So the question is what to spend my other civil actions on. I think one of them is obvious. Upgrade my second mine. Fortunately, I'm missing 1 rock to upgrade the 3rd one. I didn't want to seed again because I'm weakest. Now maybe I should have seeded. Well, I know that one of my cards in this deck, one of the cards I seeded is a Wealthy Territory, and another one is a Raiders. And I think I seeded, and I seeded a Confucius event. So it's true that I know what 3 of these are, and one of them is a Strength event. But I still, again, didn't really want the strategic territory in the deck because DB Starman is drawing more cards than I am. So I think that's the major reason I didn't seed. Even though the Wealthy Territory would have been good for me on this turn. Instead, I take the Breakthrough and the Journalism. Now, you usually don't want to take an Age 2 tech when you've already played an Age 1 tech, but I think Journalism is one of the major exceptions. Because of all the Age 2 techs in the game, this is the only one that doubles the production of the Age 1 tech, right? And so, in that sense, like, going from Printing Press to Journalism is like going from Philosophy to Alchemy, or from Bronze to Iron. So that's still good. And I think it can be especially good because when you're operating off of printing presses for science, those can start to feel really limiting as you get further into H2. So heading into journalism instead makes your science situation feel a lot better. And I will be able to play a journalism next turn even, potentially. So I do think that, along with the Breakthrough, which is just a good card for my science, this journalism could end up being quite a useful card, even though I already have printing presses going. And I upgrade a Swordsman to Warrior. I still have 1 warrior behind for my colony if I want it, and just, you know, spending military actions slowly instead of all at once. I only have 2 military actions, so this is probably something I want to do at some point regardless. So I figured I might as well do it now. Especially since I probably won't seed next turn either. I do draw an Iconoclasm, though. DB Starman seeds, reveals the Confucius event. Finishes Machu Picchu, takes the Republic, plays the reserves in advance so they can take the Organized Religion. We're seeing DB Starman face some hand size issues. This is one issue with taking the scientific method when you already have alchemy. This turn is probably fine for DB Starman. I agree that these 2 techs will be useful for them. They could maybe wait for the Kanman though, so the Republic, but I could take the Kanman, so... But they could also deny the Kanman from me. They can still deny the Kanman from me though. But they will run out of this military action when the Anziska goes away, so they'll need to find another way to get military actions with the Republic. As for my turn, again, I don't seed, because I'm weakest. I know the Raiders is in there, and I don't really want the Iconoclasm in the deck either, because I felt that I'm set up for Darwin, while DB Starman isn't, so I felt that my H2 leader would probably be more beneficial to me than theirs will be to them. I finish upgrading my mines this turn, finally, and I also choose to build a second printing press. Now, basically I did this because if I didn't, I would only have 9 rocks next turn anyway, which is not enough to finish the Ocean Liner service. So doing this doesn't make a difference to how fast I finish my Wonder, and so it's just I thought that it was nice to just have this going earlier. It also it didn't get me out of corruption, and I didn't, as we'll see, I probably didn't have much better to do with that civil action anyway. I could have maybe played the journalism and upgrade the journalism, but I think I was also maybe looking forward to a Conmon next turn. And I will be able to play the Conmon next turn because, as we can see, I take the Revolutionary Idea along with an Urban Growth, which, especially with my somewhat weak mine production with waiting so long for my iron upgrades, I think this will be quite valuable to me. And the Breakthrough, good card. I also deny the Breakthrough from DB Starman, which, as well as denying the Revolutionary Idea from DB Starman, both of which I think are important because DB Starman's hand is getting clogged with technologies, so I didn't want DB Starman to get Science Yellow cards to play those quicker. The Revolutionary Idea will also let me potentially play the Conmon next turn if the Conmon gets to be on the row, whereas if I played the Journalism, then I would not be able to play a Conmon next turn. So I think that's the reason why I didn't play the Journalism and just bought a second printing press instead. I do not take the Opera, but there will be a second Opera coming, and I already have a Journalism in my hand as a way to get some culture production, so I think my turn is reasonable. I draw an H2 bonus card as well as a Terrorism, another card that I will not want in the deck. DB Starman Seas reveals my Vaders, which hits me, unfortunately. But again, I see that because it's the less risky event. A Reign of Terror would have been even worse for me. DB Starman allows the scientific method to get some science production going, as well as upgrading a farm, so they're finally getting their irrigation going with Machu Picchu. DB Starman definitely had also, as while I kind of waited a while to get my economy going, DB Starman also ended up having to delay their economy a little bit because they had other things they needed to spend their rocks on, and because there weren't like a new deposits or anything like that in the deck. The event deck moves slowly. DB Starman takes the Opera though. That makes sense, but it means their hand is still clogged with technology cards. I do not see the Terrorism, obviously. Instead, I decide to get the Journalism because there's no Conmon in the row after all, and I'll be able to get it next turn even with the Journalism. I thought this was a pretty good time to get Journalisms going. With the Urban Growth, I will be able to still complete the Ocean Liner service next turn by taking, even though I bought a Journalism, by taking this copy of Reserves. And so we can see here they're cropless, finally coming in handy for me too, beyond the extra culture, by letting me build a third library while in Despotism. It looks like the Ocean Liner service will end up being not as high value as it sometimes is because of how much I delayed my iron upgrades. I ended up not being able to find a good opportunity to complete it in earlier turns. So instead I waited till the end of H2 to complete it. Maybe I could have tried to find a different way to play out my turns such that I would have saved up the rocks earlier to complete it earlier. On the other hand, completing it earlier might not have been that good anyway, because even with extra population, without the rocks to put them in things, they might have just ended up laying around. So I think this just ended up being a game situation where the Ocean Liner service was pretty good, but not fantastic for me. At least though I denied it to DB Starman, which I think was also probably important. I could take Maria Theresa here to play with Ocean Liner service, but I thought that Darwin would just be significantly better for me. Instead, I take the cannons and the team sports, even though I don't have a tactic for the cannons. I might draw one, or DB Starman might play one, so I think just in general having this is nice to make sure you can play most tactics in H2 and H3. And the team sports, I'll need a happy face pretty soon, so I thought this was a good opportunity to take a team sports, to take a happy face solution. Yeah, so I keep the H2 bonus card and one of the H1 bonus cards, and I draw a Politics of Strength and a Crime Wave, 2 more strength events that I probably won't want in the deck. DB Starman Seeds reveals my wealthy territory. Thankfully, I am able to win it due to my bonus cards while only spending 1 swordsman, so that's definitely very good for me and kind of fortunate, because it looks like DB Starman bid 4, so they probably only drew 1 bonus card. So that was definitely lucky on my part. Anyway, DB Starman upgrades their temple. plays the reserves for rocks and takes an architecture and a rifleman. I understand wanting both of these cards. On the other hand, even with the scientific methods, it's still going to take them a while to play out all these cards in their hand. At least the alchemy is going to be discarded when H3 begins, though. As for me, definitely I had 2 cards I was really waiting all of H2 for on the row, Darwin and the Kanman. I do elect Darwin before playing the Kanman because he saves me a civil action to play the Kanman, so I valued that civil action over the 1 rock that Leonardo would have given me if I played the Kanman while Leonardo was leader. And we'll see that that civil action ends up being indeed useful for me. Unfortunately, doing it this way means I'll delay the Ocean Liner Service by yet another turn because I'm missing exactly 1 civil action to now finish the Ocean Liner Service. However, I just thought that getting the Kanman, just having the Kanman in my hand and playing it a turn earlier was more important. DB's Jarman, it would be difficult for them to cut the, you know, if they cut the Kanman from me, it would be sitting in their hand. They're already having hand space issues, but they definitely could do it, and I really wanted the Kanman. So instead, with my remaining 3 civil actions, I took an opera as a way for me to get some more additional cultures going, culture going beyond the maybe 4 libraries I might get, as well as a cavalryman, so that I'll be able to play with knight tactics too. I'm kind of hoping to draw one or maybe copy a tactic that DB Starman plays. I upgrade my 2nd warrior. I have a free military action, so no reason not to do that. And I finish my turn and get out of corruption by upgrading one of my printing presses to journalism. So I will have exactly as many cards in my hand as I need next turn to defend against an aggression if DB Starman plays an aggression, so I wasn't worried about that. I think that navigation might be nice, but also as far as I know, there aren't any more colonies coming, so it also might just be a useless card. Engineering Genius would be nice for the Ocean Liner Service, but I have enough rocks to finally finish the Ocean Liner Service next turn anyway, and I valued the Opera Cavalryman over the Engineering Genius. I have the reserves in my hand already anyway, and I don't mind taking a bunch of text because I have the Revolution Idea and the Breakthrough and 6 science production, so it should be pretty easy for me to play text. I draw a war and 2 bonus cards. H3 begins, so we can take a look at the game situation before that event is seeded. Now it's looking definitely better for me than it did at the end of H1. It was maybe a little equal. Now it's looking like I'm pulling ahead. I now have 10 culture production going, while DB Starman only has +1, so I'll be pulling ahead of culture pretty significantly in DB Starman soon, unless they find a way to catch up really quick. Our science is the same. I'm 1 rock production behind DB Starman, and I'm behind in food production, but I have the Ocean Liner Service and they don't. And now after I played the Kanman, my civil and military action situation is looking a lot better. DB Starman will be able to get the Republic soon, but they're now suffering from military actions. Although they'll probably get the strategy to help with that too. So our economies maybe are about the same, at least once DB Starman gets the Republic and potentially the strategy, although that will also cost them a lot of science. But my culture situation is looking a lot better, and I don't think DB Starman has enough to counteract my culture advantage. So if DB Starman is going to win, they need to find a way to catch up in H3 quickly, which you can definitely do in H3, to be clear. Anyway, this is the card that DB Starman seeded, and it ends up being a Knowledge of the Ancients, which helps me a bit more than it helps them. They take Newton, though. Newton will help them, give them at least more science than I do, and that's particularly useful for them because of all their cards in their hand. I agree Newton is probably better than Nobel is in their position, just because it's the same amount of extra science, and they also, well, Nobel could also be considered because the +2 strength might also be helpful for them, just because one of the big advantages DB Starman has over me right now is strength. And so DB Starman potentially pushing that strength with Nobel could also be considered. On the other hand, it's not clear if the Nobel prizes would be more beneficial for me or for them, because we would both have about the same amount of science production minus Nobel. So I definitely also understand getting Newton here. Also, the Knowledge of the Ancients does let them get the Republic this turn, so that's a big boost for them. They also take the strategy, as mentioned earlier, to help with the military action situation post-Republic. They do are able to upgrade their mines finally, but instead of upgrading the second farm, they choose to increase the population and take 2 yellow cards, which also puts them in corruption. I feel like upgrading the second farm would be better than taking one of these yellow cards. I would say probably the Wave of Nationalism shouldn't be taken. I understand this was probably a denial to me, but my rock situation is looking pretty good anyway. I probably don't need the Wave of Nationalism, and there's also some reserves coming soon, so I think that I'm not really struggling for rocks, so I think cutting the Wave of Nationalism isn't high value for me, and instead upgrading this farm to basically give them +1 food, +2 rocks would have been better, since they probably aren't going to play this card themselves. Oh, well, they are able to get out of corruption, never mind, by building a knight at least, so that is true. On the other hand, that also cost them a military card draw on H3, so... Anyway, I don't seed, now because I think all 4 of these cards in the deck were seeded by DB Starman too, so I, felt there were probably strength events, and so I definitely wanted to slow play the event deck right now. I also didn't want either of these cards in the event deck anyway. I finally completed the Ocean Liner service. Took a while, but it happened in the end. So as we can see, I'll probably end up getting maybe 4 or 5 population out of it, which probably I could have gotten an equivalent amount just through my farms and maybe yellow cards. So this kind of ended up being a pretty mediocre Ocean Liner service for me, unfortunately. Perhaps I should have looked for a way to complete it earlier. At least I did deny it from DB Starman, but maybe DB Starman doesn't need it either with the Machu Picchu. Kind of hard to say. I feel like I haven't been getting great Ocean Liner service games for a while, so I think I need to maybe be more deliberate and more intentional with how I played this card. Anyway, I have 4 civil actions left. Kind of a lot of options here. There is the first copy of Air Forces on the row, which always needs to be considered, and I think I did consider that. However, we're in a bit of an unusual situation right now, where both me and my opponent are operating off of H1 tactics, and I also don't have an H2 tactic in my hand. So I could take the Air Forces. It's actually not clear when I would be able to get decent value out of it, because Air Forces with an H1 tactic is not great. Now, maybe DB Starman has an H2 tactic that they could use the Air Forces with, so it would at least be a potential denial to DB Starman, which also needs to be considered. But at the end of the day, I decided that there were better things to do with my 2 civil actions than take an Air Forces that currently provides me with questionable value, especially since DB Starman, had to discard so many cards due to the limited military actions, and maybe the chances of them having an H2 tactic are relatively low. I mean, it's definitely possible they could have kept one after all the cards they drew with the Enziska, but it felt like, compared to uncertain value, I think I preferred the certain value of instead taking this reserves, and then the second copy after I play my revolutionary idea. I also would face some hand size issues if I took the Air Forces with no obvious way to... You know, it would be a significant science cost. There's probably other technologies I want to play, like the opera, you know, maybe a cavalryman or a cannon, maybe the team sports. So, it would be even though it's never, you know, and also passing up Air Forces on a 2-player game is not nearly as bad because there's a second copy that, while it might be at the end of the age or something, probably I'll still be able to get relatively soon. So with my final civil action, after taking these reserves, which is just in general, since I have 8 civil actions, I have more than enough civil actions to justify taking both of these. They're just in general very powerful cards for the flexibility they give you. I'm also a little short on rocks for all the things I might want to do in H3. And for my last civil action, I just increased my population normally. Potential cards I gave up. I mean, movies and multimedia might be nice, but I already have the journalism going. I already have an opera in my hand, so I think I don't necessarily need these. Sid Meier I'm not set up for, and I think none of these cards are probably worth taking in this slot. Engineering Genius could be considered, but I don't necessarily know. I mean, I could try to spend it on a wonder, but it's also one civil action more than the reserves, which I'll probably be able to play earlier, so I valued the reserves over the Engineering Genius. Discard the war, and I draw an aggression, a war and culture, and an impact of variety. I didn't build a unit because I am protected from aggressions thanks to my bonus cards, and I didn't necessarily know if I would want a 3rd infantry, depending on the tactics I drew or tactic DB Starman might play. I figured that there's a good chance I'll want this population to go into cavalrymen or cannons instead. DB Sturman Seeds reveals a popularization of science, which gives them 2 more culture than it gives me. So now they play an opera, and they take Sid Meier too. Sid Meier is definitely a pretty good leader for DB Starman, and it's one way that DB Starman can hope to come back in culture on me. That being said, I think Steve Jobs could also be strongly considered. If we compare Steve Jobs to Sid Meier is currently giving them 4 culture from the scientific methods, which is as much culture as Steve Jobs would give them if you use Steve Jobs per turn. I think DB Starman definitely has the rocks to support Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs wouldn't cost them the science income like Sid Meier's costing them. Now, it is true that Sid Meier gives them the culture just on his own, whereas Steve Jobs requires you to put rocks into him and requires you to play text with him. So, in that sense, I understand wanting Sid Meier more. But Steve Jobs would also... The happy faces from Steve Jobs could absolutely be relevant. I mean, maybe less so since DB Starman is building operas, though, so... maybe Sid Meier was better than Steve Jobs. But I think Steve Jobs is a pretty good leader. Sid Meier is also available for one less civil action, though. And also, probably, if they had gone with Steve Jobs, they would have wanted to play the opera with Steve Jobs, and that would have cost them an additional civil action that they got back with Isaac Newton. So on that level, Sid Meier also makes sense. Anyway, they increase the population, and they build a theater. Could have, since this didn't need to be, since they don't need this happy face yet, maybe this should have been a scientific method, because that would have given them 1 less culture, but 2 more science, and their science production with Sid Meier now is starting to look a little sketchy, and they still have a lot of tech cards in their hand. So I think maybe that should have been a lab instead. Anyway, they also take a revolutionary idea, though, which will obviously help with the science situation. Upgrades the second farm, finally, as well as takes the engineering genius, which should definitely is a good card, and the multimedia should also be a good card if they can get it going. It might be a little difficult, though. They're running low on open population now. Maybe one reason to take Steve Jobs was it would free up this religion worker to go into something else, but it would have also meant they probably couldn't take, say, this revolutionary idea. So another thing to note is DB Starman could have tried to push culture to punish me for my... Sorry, could have pushed strength to punish me for my low strength. It's a little hard to push strength when it seems that they probably don't have an H2 tactic. But playing it like this means I can build urban buildings myself and not worry about my own strength. Anyway, I don't see, because again, I'm weakest. All these cards are from DB Starman, so I want to slow play the event deck. The impact of variety also looks like it won't be, it'll be like a neutral event at best, probably. Anyway, I built a theater. I need it for the happy faces right now. And so, even though it would be equal culture production as the library with Darwin, I need the happy face. I played the reserves for rocks and the other reserves for rocks, which then lets me build a second theater, again for the happy faces. I mean, this happy face I didn't need because I could have left this worker unhappy, but it's also possible that some of these are happy face events in the deck because DB Starman, especially since they built the opera, they are totally safe from any happy face events, so this is also a safer play in that sense. I also have a lot of science, so I probably don't need the extra science from the journalism that much, although I will be spending a lot of it this turn with the communism. I could try to wait for the democracy. On the other hand, DB Starman will also probably want the democracy, and so this just gets me an H3 government going right now. I also felt that the extra +1 rock from the communism might be really good for me because I'm still only on irons, so it might actually be as good as the culture from the Republic at the end of the game. And so we can see that because I put the communism, that's maybe the reason. Yeah, that's the reason I put the opera instead of the journalism. As for my last civil action, I spent it to take the modern infantry. This play is questionable to me. I mean, it is true that, as I said previously, like, the Air Forces, without an H2 or H3 tactic in my hand, the value of the Air Forces is questionable. On the other hand, you can make the exact same case for the modern infantry, that without a tactic in my hand for the modern infantry, I might end up just not playing this. So I think this should probably have been the Air Forces. Leaving myself vulnerable to DB Starman having the only copy of Air Forces and me not having it is probably one of the ways that I could lose this game. So I think this was a potentially game-losing mistake on my end. Should have taken the Air Forces. As for the cards I keep, I think I discard the War and the Aggression. No, I discard... Yeah, I guess that makes sense, because, like, maybe it's theoretically possible I'll want to play these with other cards. First of all, they're from age 2, so they'll be discarded when age 4 begins. And second of all, I won't want to seed them anyway. So, I mean, I probably won't play these either, so it's... Anyway, I do draw a tactic, and it's a mobile artillery tactic, so that kind of confirms the modern infantry being the wrong choice. You know, I don't want to be results-oriented, but I do think the logic of the Air Force is better because both this and this need a tactic draw to be good, but this needs... There's less tactics that make this good than tactics that make this good, I think. I do draw an Impact of Culture, though. That's a card I'm happy to see. That I should be able to win. DB Starman Seeds reveals an arms industry that benefits us equally. They play the revolutionary idea that enables them to play a strategy to finally get them above 2 military actions. They also take a Manhattan Project, so now I was getting a little scared that maybe DB Starman could have had a war in hand. I mean, with only 4 military actions, if they don't get, like, at least 1 patriotism, and without the Air Forces, it would be hard for them to get a big war going. But the Manhattan Project will also help them, because this doesn't need military actions to build. They could finish the Manhattan Project this turn, even, but instead they decide to take the revolutionary idea, which also makes sense, because they still need more science. On the other hand, one cost of this is it means that they have no way to get out of corruption, even after building a 4th knight for the Hussars tactic. Yeah, I guess building this without the engineering genius still wouldn't have taken them out of corruption, so that makes sense. So yeah, that's the cost of doing it this way, losing 2 rocks. This is the second turn DB Starman has spent in corruption, which corruption, you know, it's not the end of the world if you have to take it. It's all right to take it. But I almost always try to look for lines. I think it's almost always wrong to take, and you should always try to find lines that don't require you to take corruption. I think that maybe finishing the Manhattan Project this turn would have been better than taking the revolutionary idea, especially because it would have put a lot more pressure on me if DB Starman had been on 31 strength instead of 18. So as for me, I do see the Impact of Culture, because I want it in the deck. Unfortunately, it's a strength event that's revealed. But with Ocean Liner Service, it's not the end of the world as strength events go. Now, because DB Starman is only at 18 strength, I actually still don't have to worry about my strength. I still have enough to defend myself with my bonus cards. So I was happy to see that. Now, that doesn't mean I don't want to get strength. Now, one card I do need to fix my Happy Face situation, and I decided to do that by taking the Pro Sports. Looking back at this now, I'm a little questionable about it. So, if we look at the team sports, that would take me up to, this part. So, I guess I can calculate out. With 15 cards left in the deck, there's probably gonna be, 3 turns left in the game, which means if I use the Ocean Liner Service, I already used it. So, I'll probably use it, 3 more times. If I use it 3 more times, and also I have enough food that I'll almost certainly get 3 more population out. Then when the age ends, I'll be here, which means I will need 4 more Happy Faces, right? And so I guess in that sense, the Pro Sports, because of my Yellow Bank situation, the Pro Sports does mean I'll have no unhappy workers with only 1 population in the Pro Sports, whereas I would need 2 population in the Team Sports. Now, I could play the Team Sports, though, and also build a 3rd Opera. So with that being the case, I think probably I shouldn't have taken this, and I should have looked to instead get a Team Sports with an Opera. So I think this was a mistake. Anyway, I do build that, though, so that I don't have any unhappy workers. And even though I don't have to push strength this turn, I decided to do it anyway, just because if you look at our cultural situation, I'm currently going to be 16 culture ahead of DB Starman at the end of my next turn. And I also will be able to take this Hollywood. So one downside of DB Starman playing the turn the way they did is that they... 1, 2, 3, 4, 5... Okay, they will theoretically be able to take the Hollywood, but they're also not really set up for it. They only have 1 Opera. They you know, would need to build like a lot of urban buildings, and I think they won't have the time or the rocks to get a really big Hollywood going. So I figured that I would probably be able to get a big Hollywood, so I wasn't worried about losing peacefully. So I figured the only way I could lose this game is if DB's German gets a big war going against me, which seemed like that might be their plan with taking Manhattan Project. So I decided to go ahead and build some military in advance just to be safe. I definitely do want the military build up too to help me with that project. And I can also take the satellites. This will be a useful card for impacts, especially if I decide to seed the impact of variety, and the strength might also help me out. So I guess I played the Cavalryman in advance, actually. I didn't need to beat up hand space, but I played it instead of, because that last civil action, I didn't want any of these cards, which is true. I don't want any of them, so. Yeah, playing that in advance, I guess, is fine. So it's more just the pro sports that I'm questioning of my play, looking back. The efficient upgrade I can use on the library. I do buy Cavalryman this turn. Yeah, I mean, I probably don't need to, but five military actions isn't that much. So if I want to be safe from a war, then building a little in advance. I mean, I'll definitely want this Cavalryman regardless of which tactic I end up using. So discard my aggression, and I draw shock troops, another aggression, and another war. DB Starman Seeds reveals a prosperity. It gives us both the same amount, but it's more helpful for DB Starman because I have the Ocean Land Service. They built that architecture, which lets them build 2 more theaters while still finishing the Manhattan Project, thanks to the Engineering Genius 3. So that's a pretty good turn in DB Starman. Now they're coming back in culture against me. And they take democracy after playing the revolutionary idea. I see the impact of variety at this point, partly because it was a good impact for me, but also partly because I was a little worried about DB Starman potentially getting more culture production than me, possibly, thanks to Sid Meier and stuff. So I kind of wanted to get my impact of culture out earlier while I could be sure that I would be able to win it. So that's why I now wanted to move the event deck quicker. And I was rewarded for that seed by getting the freedom of movement, which I used to move a swordsman to my opera. I don't need this swordsman anymore because I'm going to be transitioning to the mechanized army tactic. So getting that swordsman into an opera is nice for me. Increase my population twice thanks to the Ocean Liner Service. I take the Hollywood. It's going to be a strong wonder for me, especially when I get either Marlena or Fleming as my H3 leader. And I also play the military build-up, which lets me build 2 cannons and play the mechanized army tactic after upgrading my library, so that now I'm definitely not in risk of aggressions, or probably not wars either. I mean, DB Starman, even if they played a war, would only have 1 military action left, and I know I got the hybrid war event, so I know they would only have 1 military action left to do anything, so I'm definitely safe from any big wars. This turn seems good for me. I don't think there was any other, like, obviously better thing to do. It does mean that I'll lose Darwin. I could have thought about taking Marlena, but I think that the 2 civil actions spent on Marlena, the other things I spent the civil actions on this turn were more important, and Fleming would also be a little bit better for me than Marlena anyway, so I was fine not replacing my leader this turn. Drew another aggression and an impact of colonies, which is another seedable event for me. DB Starman Seeds reveals an impact of strength, which they unfortunately win, so the culture is looking a little bit close right now. They increase the population, take an urban growth, take reserves, and another urban growth. Looks like they're looking to build some multimedias probably, but that's the entire turn. H4 begins. I lose a fair amount of stuff, but that's okay. I decide to, I seed, again, I seeded my impact this turn, even though I could have potentially waited for next turn, because I wanted to try to get that impact of culture out while I was for sure ahead of DB Starman in culture, because our culture production is actually a little close right now. Well, it'll be less close after I elect Fleming, but still, I didn't want to give DB Starman, especially with all these yellow card rock events in the multimedia. I was a little scared that they might get ahead of me in culture protection next turn. So I really wanted to make sure if they seeded I really wanted to make sure the impact of culture would be seeded ASAP, would be revealed ASAP. Fleming, like I said, gives me a little bit more culture than Marlena does. I don't need the bonus tactic from Marlena, and I don't need the civil action I would save by taking her instead of Fleming here. I play the satellites for my impact of variety, and because I won't have anything better to do with that civil action. Like the Patriotism again won't have much better to do with the civil action. I can't build anything this turn because I need to save all of my rocks for the Hollywood. So again, that's why DB Starman, let's see, could play the multimedia. Each of them is costing 9, and they have 4, 8, 12. They have 28. So that is enough to theoretically build 3 multimedias, which would put them at 23 culture production. So yeah, it would be way too risky to DB Starman could potentially win that impact of culture if they really push culture production hard on their turn. So definitely seeding this turn was the right play. Anyway, I take cards that I'm probably not going to be able to play, but it's mostly to deny them to DB Starman. Well, I will be able to play the engineering at least, which will also help me with my impact of variety. Looks like neither of us are going to take the Air Forces this game, which is pretty funny. DB Starman sees and reveals the impact of culture while I still win it. I was very happy to see that. DB Starman plays the Democracy too, which will give them even more culture, and we can see that, but instead of pushing culture even more, which they don't need to because the impact of culture was revealed, they build the Empire State Building, which gives them 21 cultural total, which is definitely pretty good. So DB Starman, despite not getting the Darwin, ended up getting a fairly decent amount of culture in H3. But we'll see if it'll be enough. After playing the engineering, I am able to finish the Hollywood, which will give me 38 culture. So my wonder gave me 17 more culture than DB Starman's. That's Hollywood versus Empire State Building for you. I play the Patriots as a typical swordsman, just for potential impact of competition. And because I really had nothing better to do after playing the engineering. Yeah. Before the final impacts, we can see that thanks to the Hollywood, I am 40 culture ahead of DB Starman, so there's probably no set of impacts in the deck that could let DB Starman win this game. The first one is my impact of variety, which gives me +8 culture against DB Starman. The second one is an impact of happiness that gives DB Starman +4 culture against me. Next is the impact of colonies I seeded that gives me +3 culture against them. And the last one is an impact of architecture that was seeded by DB Starman, but I still won it by 1. I mean, DB Starman got 2 total because of the 3 from seeding it, but that's still not enough to get ahead of me or come particularly close, so I end up winning this game by 48 points. This game, of the 2-player games that I played, this is maybe the one I was happiest about. I was kind of happy with how I played the El Chupacabra game, but they resigned at the beginning of H3, so it's sad to say. I mean, in this game, in a 2-player game without Buck and Shakespeare, you have to find other ways to get your culture. Now, it was fortunate for me that I got that printing press so early, but I think that taking advantage of that early printing press and then just, you know, aiming for Darwin, maintaining my culture production while also getting economy and getting just enough strength to make sure that DB Starman can't get a huge aggression against me. Now, DB Starman, I think, maybe the biggest weakness in the game is they kind of didn't prioritize anything in particular. They didn't really prioritize culture production until relatively late in H3. And even though they had the strength advantage for almost the entire game, they didn't accomplish that much with it. There were like 3 or 4 strength events, but that's about it. And I think when you have the strength advantage, like DB Starman did for so long, and especially with me kind of like dragging on strength and really not prioritizing it and going for other things instead, I think that's a time when you can kind of take advantage of the strength potential you have and really go for like, try to get aggressions or wars or something. Now maybe DB Starman didn't draw any good cards to take advantage of their strength with, which is one weakness of a strength strategy, obviously, is it's inconsistent and depends on the cards you get from the deck. But still, it did kind of feel like DB Starman kind of sometimes tried to get strength, sometimes tried to get culture protection, sometimes upgraded the economy, but didn't really focus on any one area, and so they ended up being just kind of in between, kind of medium on all three levels, whereas in a two-player game in particular, like pushing culture, even in a game like this without Bach and Shakespeare, pushing culture while keeping up in the other two areas is usually where you want to be. So I think me pushing culture throughout the entire game is why I won versus DB Starman, who only really started pushing culture in mid-H3. So, as a result of that game, I end this group with 31 total points. Overall, you know, it was a little bit of a rough four-player game situation, especially the first one. I made a major mistake in Who to War. I could have ended second. And the second game, I think I, you know, made a mistake. I ended up with corruption several turns in a row, which wasn't great. So, while not being happy with how I played those four-player games, I think obviously I really came back with the two- and three-player games. Even though I certainly didn't play those perfectly, I played them good enough to win, and they were able to carry me to, in the end, a relatively decisive victory in this group. As for my opponents, I didn't notice, unlike last time, I didn't notice any really obvious mistakes. Definitely not. I mean, El Chupacabra, I think, was my strongest opponent in this group. And I can't even necessarily say that I played that much better than El Chupacabra did. I think I was a little maybe lucky and fortunate in some of my games. I mean, in a three-player game against DB Starman, I got that scientific cooperation pact with DB Starman that helped me a lot. If it hadn't been for that, there's a very good chance I would have lost that game. And in the other game with Sakic, that was kind of a weird game where Sakic was like militarily pressuring both of us, and I also got an early gates plus computers in that game, which carried me to victory. So I think I got kind of fortunate in the 2-3-player games I played against El Chupacabra. I think I did well in our 2-player game, but still, I would say that I don't think I necessarily played that much better than El Chupacabra did. I think maybe the chips fell my way and I took advantage of my opportunities. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how El Chupacabra does in future stages of this tournament. DB Starman, unfortunately, after a very strong 4-player performance, ended up really costing them, especially we can see the 3-player games really cost DB Starman. My experience with the 2-3-player games I played against DB Starman, it kind of felt like they weren't able to find a way to get anything going. Like it felt like they were sort of always playing catch up. Like they kind of had economic issues at the end of H1, so they needed to build that up in H2. Then in H3, they just weren't able to find a good way to get culture going. So while I noticed a few individual mistakes they made, I don't know if I would necessarily say it was a huge issue with strategy or anything. Maybe it was more of I think maybe they didn't prioritize their economy enough in the 2-3-player games I played against them, and I think that ended up costing them. As for Sakic, unfortunately, even though this is the upper bracket in round 3, finishing 4th in the upper bracket is enough to eliminate you from the tournament. It's the last round where that's true. So that's sad. I think Sakic did play pretty well, and I think definitely could have gone farther in the tournament if things had gone a bit differently for them. I think that the 2 4-player games were really a huge drag on their potential in this group, and both of those 4-player games, they were hit by some pretty massive strength issues. In the first one, I think they were hit by like 3 or 4 aggressions, not by me, but by the other 2 opponents. And then in the second 4-player game, they were hit by 3 wars, 2 of which were by me. And so those really set them back really significantly, and I felt like they just weren't able to recover from those. So that's always, in a 4-player game, that's why strength is so important, because if you fall significantly behind the strength by your opponents, then with 3 opponents, they can really punish you. I think they definitely played a lot better in the 3-player games and in the 3-player games that I played against them. But sort of similarly to DB Starman, maybe it felt like I think they were in a better position than DB Starman going into H3. I think actually in both 3-player games, they were in a position to potentially win going into H3. But they weren't quite able to convert their economic position into culture production. And that can definitely be a tricky thing to do in this game. And a lot of it really comes down to experience and sort of recognizing what opportunities there are in H3 to get culture, because there's so many ways you can do it. You can do it through urban buildings, you can do it through wonders, you can do it through leaders, you can do it through wars, and it really just depends on your position, your opponent's position, and what cards are available in the card row. So I think that just comes from experience. I think Sakic definitely has a lot of potential and played well, and so I hope that Sakic continues playing this game and continues playing in tournaments, and I hope to play them again in the future. As for me, though, after winning this group, I now advanced to the upper bracket in the next stage, and the groups have actually already been posted on the Discord, and so we can see which group I'm in, and you might notice a familiar name along with me. I'm sure you all know who Weidenbaum is, one of the best players in Through the Ages, definitely the best player I will have faced in a tournament up to this point, with the exception of the Quick and Dirty tournaments, but those are sort of a different thing because it's fast acing, and you know how seriously people take it I think varies from player to player. Obviously everyone takes the World Tournament super seriously, so it's a little nerve-wracking to be placed with Weidenbaum this early, but it's also definitely exciting, and I'm really looking forward to playing Weidenbaum as well as my other two opponents, both of which obviously had to play really well to make it to this stage in the tournament, in the upper bracket. So I think these games should be really fun. I'm looking forward to playing them and making videos on them. And I'm also certainly looking forward to seeing the videos Weidenbaum makes of this group. So I hope you all are as excited as I am. Until then, I will have to see if I end up making any videos. I think I'm gonna try to make at least a few videos before like any of these games are finished, just because it's probably going to be a while before these games are finished. So I'm not sure what I'll make them on. I am in a few other tournaments. I'll think about what I want to do. I have a few options, so no promises, but I will definitely try to get some more videos out, at least like once a week or something like that. We'll play it by ear. Until then, though, as always, I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a comment if you have any thoughts or criticism of my play or my video making. I'm always looking to improve in both areas, and I hope to see you in the next video.